Hello there, welcome to Global News Today, bringing you a roundup of top international news with exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every day here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. Here are our top stories. Former President Donald Trump continues to lead stateside in the US, holding 48% support among likely voters, just ahead of Vice President Kamala Harris at 47%, according to a latest New York Times Siena poll released Sunday. Kamala Harris unveils comprehensive policy positions on her website just 48 hours before key debate with Donald Trump. And the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, joins us on this show tonight to share his perspectives on war and peace in Gaza. Also tonight, I'll be joined by Piers Morgan to rake over the coming US political debate, his views on Israel-Gaza war and his life as an uncensored broadcaster. Welcome to the show. We're going to start stateside, where Donald Trump has pipped Kamala Harris in the polls ahead of their long-awaited face-off tomorrow. Well, according to one poll, that is. Now, this is despite, of course, Donald Trump's ongoing legal troubles, a key development of which emerged on Friday. The sentencing in his New York hush money trial has been postponed now until after the presidential election. Now, this delay is a significant win for Trump for the time being, as he competes against Democrat Kamala Harris in a tightly contested race. For more on this, I'm joined now from New York by our correspondent, Sally Patterson. Sally, thank you. I know you've been following this closely. And the US election, of course, it's been key when thinking about when the sentencing for this hush money case is going to happen. The judge saying he made the decision to delay the sentencing so that he can't be seen as influencing or interfering with the election. Tell us more.
That's right. Throughout this whole process, which has been going on for several months here in New York City, Judge Juan Merchan has been trying to stress that this is not politically motivated, that the justice system and the political system here in the US are totally separate. And he's been trying to get that message out far and wide, but it's not really resonating with Trump supporters. Not to mention because Trump himself has been peddling a message that this is a politically motivated campaign. It's a smear, he says, by his opponents to try and keep him out of the White House. That's a narrative that has fed through every element of this process so far. In these speeches that he would give on his way into court and on his way out, he would use that same rhetoric time and time again, really pumping that message home to his supporters watching as their hero really was going through this political, what they saw as a political process. He wasn't allowed to make such speeches inside the courtroom. Indeed, there were no broadcast cameras allowed inside there either. Instead, we had to rely on information coming out of the court and still pictures at the beginning and end of every day. But at the end of that trial, spanning over several weeks with many star witnesses taking the stand, Donald Trump was found guilty of 34 felony counts. It was a historic trial and indeed a historic conviction. We've never seen a former president or president of the United States become a felon as he has done now. That means he will be running for the White House with a criminal conviction under his belt. That hasn't stopped him, though. If anything, it's generated more support for his campaign. His supporters that I've been speaking to throughout this whole trial and afterwards have said that this doesn't affect how they're going to vote. They said whether he's a felon or not, he's got their backing to go back into the White House at the end of this year.
Sally, how is this being perceived stateside? Because obviously a lot of Donald Trump supporters for the last few months through all of his various trials have called this Operation Lawfare manipulated justice. Will they be seeing this as a triumph, or is this more manipulation of the system?
The fact that his sentencing has been delayed, I would say probably isn't going to matter all that much to supporters waiting at home. And that's because, as you say, they're calling this lawfare. They think that the whole system is rigged against their candidate and in support of his opponent. That is, of course, Kamala Harris, who took over from Joe Biden not so long ago and is now really neck to neck with Trump in the polls. But what we're hearing from his supporters is that they no longer trust the legal system in the US because they think that this is being generated by his political opponents. We saw that narrative way back in January 6th when many of his supporters attacked the Capitol, leading to several deaths and many, many arrests in the aftermath of that fateful day. And what we know from that is that they lost faith in the system that they believe is really rigged against them and rigged against Donald Trump. They believe that Trump is the only man speaking for them. They believe he's the one who is listening to the concerns of the everyday person. They think, the supporters that I've spoken to, that is, believe that Donald Trump is the one who's going to fix the economy. He's going to really tighten the borders. He's going to deal with the crime that they're seeing playing out on their streets. That's the narrative that they're listening to. And indeed, that's the narrative that Trump and his team are very carefully buying into. Everything along with the various court cases he's facing across the country, they're seeing as background noise. This is, of course, one of 4 different criminal cases that he's facing across the country. It's the only one that has gone to trial so far, and indeed the only one that's led to this criminal conviction that we've seen. That's not to mention all of the civil cases he's facing as well. Lots to keep up here with here in the US. But for Donald Trump, this is all really a matter of going through, continuing to express this narrative that the system is rigged against him. And as we're seeing in the polling, as you mentioned, a New York Times Siena College poll that came out just this weekend, it doesn't seem to be having much impact when it comes to voters. Trump is leading just ahead of Kamala Harris, 48% to her 47%. And all eyes are now going to be on the debate coming up on Tuesday to see how that plays out over the next couple of months.
Indeed, Sally, that was going to be my next question to you. We have got eyes on this debate happening tomorrow. We're going to have more of a discussion about that shortly on this show. But surely the timing of this sentencing, for one thing, will be a sign of relief potentially for Trump. But do you expect Harris and her team to seize upon this as a strategy for the debate, to bring up, of course, his various criminal trials?
Well, since Harris was named as that official Democrat nominee, she's leaned in heavily to this narrative of herself as a former prosecutor and Donald Trump as a convicted felon. That's language that she's been using throughout this process so far, and we can be sure that that's going to come up at the debate on Tuesday. She's known as being a very aggressive questioner. She was a very successful prosecutor, often going after Trump allies as well and Trump officials. So we can almost guarantee that that's going to be a key theme in the debate coming up. She's going to likely touch upon both this hush money trial here in New York City, but those other 3 criminal cases across the country as well. We're also, though, expecting a different line from Harris than what we saw from President Joe Biden. Her team is trying to really separate the two, both to Donald Trump, but also in the eyes of potential voters as well. Biden was seen by many Americans and likely voters as being perhaps past his best, unable to keep up with the pace of the election cycle, keeping up with Donald Trump's consistent attacks as well. And we saw that very clearly at the last debate, which really was the beginning of the end for President Biden. He was stumbling over his answers. He found it difficult to come back on a lot of Donald Trump's attacks. Some of them even got personal, with the two of them bickering over golf up there on the podium. And many voters saw a real contrast between these two men. Harris's team are trying to present her as young, full of energy, and really on it with her responses, looking at his track record on those issues that he really wants to be pushing here, looking at immigration, looking at the economy, and trying to big up her own record as well in those two areas. We know that Harris has been locked down at a hotel in Pittsburgh, relentlessly practicing for the debate over the past few days with a really strong team around her. Indeed, she's even got someone sitting in as Donald Trump to really make sure that she's very well rehearsed when it comes to that debate. Trump's team is trying very hard to distance himself from that picture, making it seem that he's already as prepared as he would need to be. He has been having what they're calling policy sessions, where they're looking at Kamala's record and some of the things that she has and hasn't said in the past, whereas they've really been careful not to buy into this narrative of debate prep. In fact, his team put out a statement saying that he was already as prepped as he needed to be, but he was, they say, surrounding himself by those key figures, those allies and aides who could bring him more knowledge and help him flesh out some of these decisions and some of that rhetoric going into the debate, but trying to really make it clear that he's a well-seasoned, well-practiced debater and put him on a stage, and this is his time to really go ahead, and we'll be watching to see what kind of narrative comes out of that. If he's going to go in as a bullish figure, going hard on those aggressive attacks against Kamala Harris and her identity, as we've seen him do over this process, and also her policies in the past, she in response is going to have to decide if she's going to spend her time attacking him as a person, attacking his criminal record, or indeed really getting stuck into some of those policies that he carried out in his first term in office. So we'll keep our eyes on that to see how this plays out on a stage in front of millions of viewers, not in that room, but here in the US and around the world.
Certainly we will, Sally. I'm sure we'll be speaking to you later in the week about that. Thank you so much for joining us, Sally Patterson in New York. Well, the US election is, of course, less than 2 months away, with Donald Trump vying to get back into the White House alongside his running mate, J.D. Vance. And they are competing against current Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz. It's already been a tumultuous few months filled with criminal convictions against Trump, a last-minute change of candidates, and even that assassination attempt. Carolyn Malone reports from Washington.
We are bound together by a single fate and a shared destiny. We rise together or we fall apart.
Just days after an attempt on his life, Donald Trump pledged to unite the country while speaking at the Republican National Convention. Public sentiment reflected in the polls seemed to be in his favor.
Tonight is a night of hope.
And his VP pick, J.D. Vance, a US senator from Ohio, appeared promising. But less than 2 months later, it's a different story.
I'ma keep on running 'cause a winner don't quit on themselves.
Democratic contender Kamala Harris, already the first black female vice president, has ignited a new energy into the election campaign, with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz at her side.
There's a strong mix of personality as well as policies that are having an impact on the state of the race. Trump on the brink of 80 here is certainly a disastrous candidate for many reasons, foremost of them being that he lost in 2020. In general, we Americans like to take a chance on somebody new every 4 to 8 years.
Age was a major factor in people losing confidence in President Joe Biden. He announced he would not run again after weeks of pressure following a disastrous debate against Trump at the end of June. The Harris-Walz campaign raised more than $360 million in August, 3 times as much as Trump-Vance, money critical for adverts and projects to get people out to vote. Now, national polls show Harris has gained and is slightly edging out Trump. But in the US election, people vote on a state level, assigning a number of electoral votes to the winning candidate to decide who will become president. Aggregate polling shows many states are already secure for the blue or Democrats, or for the red, the Republicans. However, it's less predictable swing states that Harris has to target if she has a chance of winning.
Kind of the key area to watch for me is going to be the upper Midwest, specifically Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. To me, she probably has to win all 3 of those, which is a challenge, but in a lot of the key states, the local level Democratic versus Republican parties, the kind of Democratic parties are better funded and better organized.
Organised or not, there are a number of outside factors that could influence how some people vote in the election this year, such as whether there's a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, or even a truce in Ukraine with Russia, both of which reflect on the current Biden-Harris administration. Trump, now a felon convicted of 34 business fraud charges, claims to have a very quick solution to these wars. He's also promised to reduce the cost of living and fix immigration and crime. But it's not clear how he would do all that. What is clear is that this election campaign has already been full of twists and turns, with the results likely to be consequential not just for the future of the United States, but also with how the country decides to engage with the rest of the world. Caroline Malone, Arabiya English, Washington.
Well, in spite of news that sentencing of Donald Trump in his New York hush money trial has been delayed, that came on Friday until after November's presidential election takes place. A win for the Republican as he battles Democrat Kamala Harris in the knife-edge race. On Tuesday, we will finally get to see the first U.S. election debate between both candidates, Trump and Harris. And that is, of course, since Harris took the place of Joe Biden in the race for the White House. It is, of course, at the moment, an era of unprecedented polarization in American politics, perhaps even a new frontier in the two-party system, with a handful of establishment Republican figures actually turning their backs on Donald Trump in recent days. The outcome of this debate and the race, of course, will have profound and far-reaching impacts, not only in the US, but around the world as well. For expert insight into what to expect, we can now bring in Donald Trump's Deputy Director of Communications, Caroline Sunshine, as well as the host of the Young Turks YouTube channel, Cenk Uygur. Thank you both very much for joining us. I'll start very simply, Caroline, with saying 56 days to go. How key is this debate?
Absolutely. It's key for the American people. The American people deserve to see these two candidates on stage. They have seen President Trump once before when he was on that debate stage. He obviously had such a dominant debate performance that the result was that the Democrat nominee for president had to step down completely out of the race. That's unprecedented in American history. I don't believe even Abraham Lincoln or Ronald Reagan or JFK has done that, just to give perspective of how significant that is in the course of American history. So this debate is important for the American people because you have Kamala Harris, who has really been appointed as the nominee of her party rather than really selected. She has really refused to face tough interviews from the Quest. I don't call that CNN interview that she had for 16 minutes that wasn't a solo interview that she used with her emotional support candidate, Tim Walz. I don't call that a hard-hitting interview for the American people. This is a woman who is running from her record. She has been the incumbent for the last 3.5 years. She has been in the White House. Everything that she is telling the American people she is going to do now, she has had the opportunity to do for the last 3.5 years, and she hasn't done it. So this is an important night for the American people. President Trump has a record to run on. He was obviously president just 4 short years ago. Americans remember the prosperity, the security, and the economy that they had under President Trump. And I want to hear what Cenk has to say. I was really looking forward to having a debate. I want to stay with you a little bit longer, and then I have to hop off. I'm so sorry. I hope that we can have a rain check because I would really love to have this this back and forth together.
Of course, Caroline. Let's get Cenk in. Let's get Cenk straight and Cenk your response to that, because
Thank you so much.
As Caroline has suggested, Cenk, there is this assumption that that Kamala Harris is somehow dodging the press. She doesn't want to be held to account, and that by all accounts, she's going to be very challenged by Trump.
Yeah. So first, on dodging the press, she is. It's a terrible idea. It's free media. You should go do it. If you can't make your own case, you shouldn't be running for president. I don't think that's her decision. It seems like it's the campaign's decision, and they're making a monumental mistake. They need to turn around immediately. In terms of the debate, Kamala Harris is both a great debater and a mediocre debater. Why do I say that? Because we've seen her in those contexts. She won the first primary debate when there was, dozens of people on the stage on the 2020 Democratic primary. She was terrific on that night. But she's also had some mediocre debates. So she's a mixed bag in terms of debating. Trump, on the other hand, is totally unhinged, mentally unstable. And so what we'll have afterwards is this nonsense debate about who won the debate. I've seen Trump debate now a lot, right? 2016, 2020, and in this cycle. And he says in debates the things that he normally says on TV and at his rallies, things that are mentally unstable. And then I feel like with the entire country and the entire world is being gaslit. And then we have a discussion about who won the debate. I can tell you right now, if Trump does anything like he did in the other debates, he'll lose massively, because he will say things that a lunatic person, there's someone that should be in a mental asylum will say. And by the way, anybody who's real that's watching this, a non-political person, knows that, right? So it's just that the political people have to make it seem like it's even. It's not even. One person is a normal candidate, like her or not. The other person is someone who shouldn't be in the race. He should be in a mental asylum.
Well, look, Cenk, seeing as we've sadly lost Caroline as part of this conversation because she had to dash off, I want to see if I can take the other side of this. It wouldn't be in my normal position in this. I'm here to kind of moderate an objective point of view. But let me challenge you on what Harris really offers here, because there is the accusation that she's, quote-unquote, a generic Democrat, that she's got sort of boilerplate Democratic messaging, that she's represented by nothing but her record, as Caroline was saying, and that people aren't really clear on her policy points. Do you think any of that's fair?
Yes and no. Is she a generic Democrat? Absolutely. She's a very normal establishment Democrat. So if you're a progressive out there that has dreams that she's your knight in shining armor and she's going to come in and do a populist campaign, administration that holds Wall Street accountable, all the donors accountable, she's not going to do that. She's a generic Democrat who's going to be stable and normal and, just go in the exact direction we're going now. So, and that's why she's got issues, and that's why the race is 50-50, because a lot of Americans don't want to keep going in the direction that we're going now. So I understand. I understand why they're going to Trump in desperation. I understand why they might not like a generic Democrat. But is she somehow worse? And in terms of announcing policies, has she not announced enough policies? She's announced more policies than Donald Trump has. And when you ask Donald Trump what his policies are, there's a couple of things that he always comes back to. Corporate tax cuts. He already cut them from 35 to 21, and he says he's going to cut them to 15% now. That's a giant gift to the richest people in this country, to corporate rule. It's the least populist thing that anyone could do. He's actually a giant elitist saying, I'm going to give tax breaks, trillions of dollars in tax breaks, to my incredibly wealthy friends. I want no part of that. Nobody should want any part of that. But that's a rare policy proposal that he actually talks about in detail. Everything else is like, I'm going to protect the border. How? In the bill that he just rejected. That was basically a Trump bill. So, in other words, their bills would be identical. So where's your policy on that? Nothing. And he didn't build a wall last time. So he's got, and then whenever you ask him about child care or housing, he goes back to drill, baby, drill, and I'm going to do tariffs. How does that help with child care or housing? The guy has no command of the materials, almost no policy. He's a national and international embarrassment. So it's just painful to look at. I don't love the status quo. I don't love a normal establishment Democrat or Republican, but the Republicans keep giving us this like Frankenstein guy who's both incredibly elitist, only looks out for the rich, and is mentally unstable. So thanks a lot, Republicans, for giving us no choice at all.
Well, that brings me to something I wanted to finish this discussion on, and this is an outsider looking into the US, to your politics. Is this the best that the US has to offer in terms of candidates? Because it's been a laborious process to get to even this point. We had to wait for Biden to stand down, for Harris to come up and be an alternative candidate. But she's already the vice president. We've seen her, sure, tried and tested. But it just seems that there seems to be a dearth of candidates at the top that could be going for this. What's happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I share your frustration, and I share the world's frustration. In fact, so much so that I ran against President Biden in the primary. And the thing that I kept saying to everyone is, Biden is too old and Trump is too crazy. And I was right about Biden, and I'm right about Trump. And so, I mean, it was just the two worst choices that you could possibly imagine. The reason Trump won the last debate, and it's inconceivable for Trump to win any debate, the only reason he won it is because it was a technical knockout, because Joe Biden literally couldn't speak. I mean, this is so embarrassing. So if you say, hey, why has it gotten to this point? Or now Kamala Harris is much better. She's a normal functioning Democrat, right? And so I'll take that and I'll do my populist fight. I'll live to fight another day. And if she is as establishment as I think she is, we should run a primary against her in 2028, et cetera, right? But I don't want to hand the country over to a madman. So, but why are these our two options? Because this is what the donors keep picking. The donors don't want an interesting populist that's going to stand up for the average American. They want someone who's going to follow their orders. So Kamala Harris is going to follow it in a very standard way that every American politician has for a long time. And Trump is going to put it on steroids. So he keeps bragging. He's like, oil companies, give me money, and I'll let you drill everywhere, and I'll reduce your taxes. And Elon Musk, give me money. I used to be against electric vehicles. Now I'm for electric vehicles. Jeff Yazd, give me money. I used to want to ban TikTok. Now I'm not going to ban TikTok. He's just put a for sale sign on the American government, and he's selling it off right in front of our own eyes as he's campaigning. It's disgusting. So the number one problem in America is corruption. All these politicians report to their donors and only serve their donors.
Well, yeah, it's interesting you say that, because you say that there is no populist candidate who is actually serving the working man and not for the donors and not with some sort of team orchestrating everything behind them. But Trump, of course, puts himself forward to be the everyman. He has those populist messages. He says he's right down there fighting for the average American. And why is that not the case? You're saying he sold out to Musk. He's selling out to these big donors. He's selling out to big buyers. Do you not think he's acting at all in the interests of the everyman?
Zero, none whatsoever. He's the biggest fraud, liar, con man in American history, and it's obvious to anyone who's rational and objective. So he did Trump charity. Oh, it turns out it was a fake charity. He bought pictures of himself. I mean, he's a joke of a man, a total clown of a man. He did Trump charity, then he did Trump University, had to pay a $25 million fine because it wasn't a university, it wasn't even classes. Everything he does is a con job. So the con man realized, oh, the American people want a populist. They want somebody to stand up for the average guy. That's true. Good job on figuring that out. Now, that's not who Donald Trump is. So he's like, okay, I'll pretend to be for the average guy. But what did he actually do? He delivered a $2 trillion tax cut to corporations that are running and ruining our lives in America, suppressing our wages, not giving us health care, denying us everything that so many other countries have. We don't even have paid family leave. In America, you guys think the rest of the world thinks we're rich and we're living it up? No, some people in America are rich. But the rest of America, when you have a baby, you have to report to work the next day. The mom does. That's insane. Everyone else on the planet has paid family leave. Almost everyone has universal health care. We don't have universal health care. In America, if you don't have health insurance, they literally let you die. 68,000 people a year die because they don't have health insurance in America. We live under barbaric corporate rule, and Trump comes along and goes, oh, isn't corporate rule terrible? And then gives trillions of dollars to corporations just because they're his donors. He didn't drain the swamp. He filled the swamp. He makes P.T. Barnum look honest. He's a legendary con man. And what's frustrating to me is I love the American people, but that the fact that 30 to 40% of them can't see that this is an obvious snake oil salesman. He's running a con on you. We're not the marks. Conservative voters are the marks. A con man picks his mark and thinks, who can I sucker? Who can I trick into getting their money, their vote, etc.? And that's what Donald Trump is doing. He's never delivered for the average guy, and now he brags about it. He's like, well, hey, Elon Musk gave me a lot of money. I was against electric vehicles. Now I'm for electric vehicles because he gave me a strong endorsement, which means about $100 million. Miriam Adelson is a giant donor, about to give him $100 million. Her husband gave him $100 million in 2016 and 2020. And he moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel because Sheldon Adelson told him to. Now Miriam Adelson is saying that maybe he should let Israel annex the West Bank, according to reporting in Israel. So this is lunacy, where Donald Trump is just saying, oh, you want U.S. foreign policy? It's for sale. Give me campaign money, and I'll let you direct U.S. foreign policy. In fact, last thing on this, Elon Musk, Trump said a couple of days ago that he's going to let him audit and restructure the entire federal government because he's giving Trump money. This is insanity. It's corruption defined. He's the exact opposite of what he claims to be.
Look, Cenk, you brought up Marx. I know you meant Marx as in targets, M-A-R-K-S rather. But I was thinking there of when you were talking about rights, about maternity care, about the average person, about unions, etc. I think we may have just lost the connection to Cenk. I'm going to come back to him, hopefully in just a few minutes' time. But I was going to speak to him of course, about the fact that Elon Musk and others have named Kamala Harris a communist, and was going to ask Cenk about that. So if we manage to re-establish a line with Cenk, we will ask him about that. Meantime, the Biden administration, of course, continues to be dogged by low approval ratings over Biden's handling of the economy, despite the country's finances being in strong health. Some experts believe that a so-called vibecession could be because Americans are still smarting from high interest rates. While Kamala Harris tries to sell the administration's record on the economy as she campaigns for the presidency, her opponent Donald Trump is looking to appeal to those whose voters say they don't feel it in their pocket. From Washington, Kate Fisher reports.
The US economy is growing, expanding by 3% last year, with low unemployment and fears of a recession fading. But voters don't seem to be buying it. A poll for the Guardian newspaper from earlier this year shows nearly 3 in 5 Americans wrongly believe that the US is in a recession and that the economy is shrinking.
It's just everybody's feeling it. You know, I have 2 kids and it's hard.
Prices are higher than they were a few years ago.
Economists have given a name to this disconnect.
Vibecession is the idea that the economy can be doing quite well, but the vibes, the feelings of the people are not where we think they should be.
Harvard economist Judd Kramer co-wrote a paper earlier this year analysing why this could be happening.
The measures that we traditionally use to describe whether we're in a recession or an expansion, those are all in great shape. Unemployment is low, inflation is declining, GDP growth has been doing well. We would have expected that given those things, consumer sentiment would also be rising. But we haven't seen that to be the case at all.
That could be partly down to the effect of elevated interest rates, which have raised mortgage and credit card repayments, but which aren't included in measures of inflation. Rates are set by the US central bank and not the president, but they've left many Americans feeling pinched, something Trump is maximising on.
Are you better off now with Harris and Biden than you were with a person named President Donald J. Trump? Under Kamala Harris and crooked Joe Biden, the American dream is dead.
Harris has acknowledged people's concerns.
While our economy is doing well by many measures, prices for everyday things like groceries are still too high. You know it and I know it.
But as the sitting vice president, she will have to distance herself from that if she's to increase her support. With the US central bank not expected to lower interest rates much, if at all, by November's election, and with families still feeling the pinch, the Harris campaign may struggle to convince Americans that her party's handling of the economy is worth their vote. Kate Fisher, Arabiya English, Washington.
Well, coming up on the show, the broadcasting titan Piers Morgan speaks to me about the US election, the war on Gaza, and what it's really like to live life uncensored.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Welcome back. Now, with foreign policy forming a major pillar of the US election race, I spoke with the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, about the latest developments from the continued Israeli assault on Gaza and ongoing international efforts to find a resolution. I'm now joined by the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert. Thank you for your time. So, look, we're almost a year on from the events of October 7th. Did you ever think that we would be at this point, about 11 months later, with conflict still raging, some hostages still in captivity and some hostages killed?
No, not really. I have to say that I thought, and I said 8 months ago, that at that time we should have stopped the war. We have achieved almost everything that we could have achieved in a military operation such as this, with all the underground city, which is enormously difficult to fight with. And I thought that the longer we continue, the more likely we are going to lose many of the hostages. And unfortunately, we are now almost a year after October 7th. And we have a very small number of the original number of the hostages still alive. So I think it's a total failure, the Israeli government. No strategy, no vision, no political vision, no military planning, nothing.
I mean, you've been very clear in your words about the current Israeli government. You called Netanyahu and his government a gang recently. In an op-ed for Haaretz, you argued that their ultimate aim is the purging of the West Bank of Palestinians. You use words like Armageddon. Do you stand by those words, and what kind of response have you had to them?
Entirely. Unfortunately, I find myself time and again, which really breaks my heart, that some of the worst possible visions that I have in my mind are unfolding every day in our lives, which is absolutely terrible. Yes, I think that the Messianic groups in the Israeli government, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and all the supporters are absolutely anxious to carry on the war in the south, to expand the war into the north, and to break down the Palestinians in the West Bank. They want an Armageddon. They believe that within the framework of an Armageddon, comprehensive, violent confrontation, they will be able to expel the Palestinians from the West Bank and prepare the eventual complete annexation of the territories into the state of Israel. So, as far as they are concerned, maybe it's becoming obvious to many. Problem is that they are fully supported by the Prime Minister. Netanyahu is entirely with them. Whether deep in his heart he may have a different idea, I don't know. But how can you judge a Prime Minister if not by what he does, what he says, who are his partners, who does he support, and what do they support in what he does? And there is a complete partnership between him and the extreme Messianic groups. And this is a serious threat to the future, the stability, the balance, the status of the state of Israel. And there is only one remedy, none other than the overthrowing of the Israeli government. The sooner, the better.
Well, yeah, clearly that unrest or that dim opinion, we could call it politely, of Benjamin Netanyahu has spread not only from the political class, from his opponents in government and outside of government, but to the streets as well. In recent weeks, we're seeing large unrest in places like Tel Aviv with unions going on strike, etc., putting pressure on his government. Do you think enough pressure will be applied by the public that another election will be called?
It's growing. I don't know. I can tell you what I want. I want to try to spread the word. I try to speak up as much as I can in order to influence as many. There is a growing distrust and rage amongst hundreds of thousands, millions of people in Israel. In fact, you have to remember something which is not perhaps emphasized enough in the international media. In an endless number of opinion polls which were taken in Israel since October 7th, 2023 until today, consistently, more than 60% of the Israelis say that they do not trust the prime minister. 60% of the people say that they think that the decisions taken by the cabinet under his complete influence are mostly influenced by his personal political and interest rather than the national interest of the state of Israel. So it's true, technically, Netanyahu has a majority of 4 votes in the Knesset. He has 64 votes, and the absolute majority is actually 61. So he has just a very small number of votes. But that does not reflect, at the present time, the real public opinion of the people of Israel. And I expect that this growing distrust will spread further to the point where it will become almost impossible to carry on, and the government will have to call for early elections. And some of the partners of the government will just withdraw from their support one way or another. I hope it will not happen in the streets. There is a danger that sometimes things go out of control. We had a demonstration the other day with close to 400,000 people in the center of Tel Aviv. And there were clashes with police, and the police is under the influence of Ben Gvir. And there are many fears amongst many Israelis that the internal balance, which is the essence of what democracy is all about, is eroding. And I hope it will not reach a point where there will be a violent confrontations between different groups of Israelis, rioters, demonstrators, protesters, and the Israeli police and the Messianic groups that are inspired and influenced and operated by Ben Gvir and their supporters will not clash with others. We are not far from it.
I mean, that's why I find it interesting that we hear this line of reasoning that Benjamin Netanyahu is stalling on a proposed internationally mediated ceasefire deal for supposed political gain, when the picture that you're painting there is it could be a political disadvantage to keep holding off from a ceasefire deal, no?
No, the problem is that the reason he's stalling this deal is very simple. His partners, without which he will not have a majority in parliament and he will collapse momentarily, they say, if he will go for this deal, they will break down the government. So the only reason that he doesn't make the deal that will save the lives of all the remaining living hostages, and we don't know how many of them are alive. We know that there are no more than 101. How many of the 101 are still alive? I wish I knew. I don't know, and I don't think anyone in Israel knows. And perhaps every day that passes will reduce this number. So the reason why Netanyahu doesn't make this deal is very simple. Ben Gvir and Smotrich say that if there will be a deal, there will not be a government. And therefore, he has to make a choice between his continued control over the government or a deal which will save the hostages and which will end the military operations, which will save the lives of many Israeli soldiers that are going to be killed in Gaza just as part of this process of violence and confrontation, and will also save the lives of many Palestinian innocent civilians amongst the Palestinians that are becoming victims because of these unavoidable confrontations that take place sometimes in the urban centers where the Hamas fighters are hiding. So this is the choice. It's very simple. It's very difficult, and for us it's heartbreaking. But there is something that I want to say. In my lifetime, I've been around for quite a long time. I've been in the center of Israeli politics for over 40 years. 9 times elected into parliament, and so on. There is a time when leadership is measured by one thing, the ability of the leader to take a decision which is the opposite of everything that he has been preaching for and supporting all his life. Only because at a time that he needs to take that decision, this is the right thing to do for the people that he is leading. And this was the greatness of Churchill and the greatness of de Gaulle and the greatness of Menachem Begin and the greatness of Yitzhak Rabin and the greatness of Ariel Sharon. Bibi is not great. He's very small. He's very small. He pretends, he believes that he is a Churchill guy, but he's not even Chamberlain.
Well, as you say, that would take giving up a narrative, something you've preached for, something you have stuck to for so many years, something you have surrounded yourself with in your own government and cabinet, and it would take that sort of bravery to step away from that narrative and change it to do what you think is right now. Tell me this, though, sir, if you don't mind, Mr. Olmert. How much is Netanyahu's government listening to those outside of the government, like yourself, like others? I mean, you reportedly signed this agreement with the nephew of former Palestinian Authority President Yasser Arafat back in July, talking about working together to promote peace in the Middle East using the 1967 borders as a basis. Do you think there's any hope at all that your plans, that discussion is being listened to?
I didn't say anything to Arafat. I issued a joint statement with the nephew of Arafat, of Dr. Nasser Kilwa, but this is not something I'm going to discuss now. This is something that we are going to make a joint appearance later this month, and we will talk about it. But if you ask me whether the Israelis, the cabinet ministers, listen to me, the answer is very simple. No, they don't listen to me. They don't listen to anything other than they are captives of their own obsessions and rhetorics and pettiness and aggression and messianic dreams. They live completely separated from mainstream of what Israel is all about. They are completely separated from the basic fundamental values which have characterized the state of Israel and the Jewish people for so many generations. We are not, in our nature, we are not occupiers. We don't hate. We don't persecute. We don't commit war crimes. We are tolerant, and we are prepared to compromise with our adversaries and our enemies. We know how to fight, and when necessary we fight, and there was no question that we had to destroy the military power of Hamas because of the terrible, terrible atrocities that they have committed against our people and the danger that they have established for the future of the Middle East at all and the state of Israel. But we are far away from where we were supposed to be at the beginning. We destroyed their military power, mostly. And now it's the time to think about the future, to offer a political vision, to end the war, save the hostages, to pull out from Gaza, to start negotiations for a comprehensive peace between us and the Palestinians. But unfortunately, considering the present circumstances, this will mean the end of the political future of Netanyahu and a group of thugs which surround him and encircle him. And therefore, they wouldn't listen to me. They wouldn't listen to the voice of reason. They wouldn't listen to the voice of compromise and compassion, because that will bring an end to their political careers. And for them, this is the most important thing.
So with that in mind, I'm just interested to end by asking why you give interviews like this now. Are you hoping that they will listen, or are you speaking to a different audience?
No, I speak for the people of Israel, to the majority of the people of Israel. Yeah, of course, those who will disagree with me. But I'll tell you something, I measure it every day. I walk in the streets, I go to a restaurant, I go to a store, I meet with people. A number of people that come to me and say, you speak for us, against those who curse me, is maybe one who curses me for every 100 that come to me and want to hug me and to thank me for what I say. I speak to them and I speak to those who don't see me, but who feel like me and who share with me the desires, the vision, the dreams, and the ambition to change realities and to end wars, to end losing lives of innocent people, and to start embark on what will ultimately become the momentum for peace.
Former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's get reaction to that now. Listening into that interview was the host of the Young Turks YouTube channel, Cenk Uygur. Cenk, we lost you before. Thank you very much for making it back. We were just listening there to Ehud Olmert talking about the ongoing situation and any chance at all for finding some sort of resolution, if not, a ceasefire. In terms of the US election, which you and I were talking about just before we lost connection, how are the candidates handling this, walking this tightrope? How much of the debate will be focused around foreign policy tomorrow?
Yeah, unfortunately, both candidates agree that they should serve Israel. So there's not much of a distinction here, except for, as usual, Donald Trump is more unhinged. So Kamala Harris says that she will not waver from supporting Israel at all, which means she's refusing to use the leverage that America has. America has overwhelming leverage. First of all, we have the weapons. Second of all, we give them $4 billion a year. Third of all, we just gave them $26 billion. So we could use that leverage to push for a ceasefire. And Kamala Harris is saying, no, I will not do that, just like Joe Biden said he wouldn't do it. And the reason for that is donors. AIPAC is one of the largest lobbying groups in America. And they are on Netanyahu's side. They're not on Israel's side. They're on Netanyahu's side. So if you waver 1% from Netanyahu, they, threaten to spend a ton of money against you, and they do. They're going to spend $100 million in this election. For people that live outside the U.S., the most important fact you have to remember is bribery is basically legal in America. You can give unlimited money to politicians and their PACs, so you can't put it into their pockets directly, although a lot of times they do through indirect ways. But you can give unlimited money to their political careers, so they serve any donor. It's not just AIPAC, it's not just Israel, it's also drug companies, oil companies, etc. So that's Kamala Harris. But Donald Trump, as usual, puts it on steroids. Since Sheldon Adelson and Miriam Adelson have been his biggest donors throughout his career, giving $100 million at a time, he says, you do U.S. foreign policy. I'll leave it to you. So that's why we moved our embassy because Sheldon Adelson ordered Donald Trump to do that, and he did. He gave Miriam Adelson the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is a joke. He gave it to a donor. It's the highest honor we have. So this guy's just selling off the government one piece at a time. And now Miriam Adelson is saying, apparently, again, like I said, according to reporting from Israel, that she wants Trump to let Israel annex the West Bank. Well, that's just an invitation for the largest war in the Middle East we've ever seen in our lifetimes. I don't know if it'll get into World War III. I don't know if it'll involve Russia, China, and other nuclear powers. But I do know that Iran, for example, is 4 times the size of Iraq. And that would precipitate an enormous war. So neither one of them will help the Palestinians at all. But Donald Trump will make the situation much, much worse.
Well, having said that, again, I'm going to try and play the other side to this, given that we lost the other side to this debate. Some say that Donald Trump is actually stronger when it comes to foreign policy than, say, somebody like Harris, because he has the ability to get on a level with some other leaders of other countries here. I'm thinking of Putin in Russia. I'm thinking of Hungary, Orban. I'm thinking of China. I'm not saying he's a savvy geopolitical operator, but do you buy the argument that he has something to offer other countries' leaders when it comes to negotiations?
Yeah, no, he's a joke in negotiations. There is only one potential wild card positive of Trump, which I'll get to in a second. But in terms of how the negotiations went, it's basically he asked them, how much money are you going to give me personally? and then he gives them whatever they want based on that. Or how much do you love me personally? So he talked about how Kim Jong-un and him fell in love and wrote love letters to one another. I'm not joking. Those are verbatim quotes. So that's the communist dictator of North Korea. So in the meanwhile, okay, how did the negotiations go? Kim Jong-un built 6 to 8 nuclear weapons. Donald Trump did nothing about it. It was a disaster for America. But Kim Jong-un wrote him love letters, so Donald Trump gave him whatever he wanted. This is a pathetic child of a man. So with Putin, he refused to have an American translator in the meetings. He relied on the Russian translator because he didn't want a single other American knowing what him and Vladimir Putin talked about.
Okay,
Come on. And then he gave Putin everything that he wants.
Host of the Young Turks there, Cenk Uygur, thank you very much
Yes.
for coming back to join us on the show. Still to come, the broadcasting titan Piers Morgan on the US election, war on Gaza, and what it's really like to live life uncensored.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Let's return to the US now, shall we, where Vice President Kamala Harris is preparing to face the former President Donald Trump in a 90-minute debate Tuesday, which will be broadcast live on ABC. For more on this, I'm joined from Washington, D.C. by our correspondent, Nick Harper. Nick, thanks so much. Kamala Harris's team is reportedly aiming to rattle Donald Trump in Tuesday's debate. Do you think their strategy will succeed?
Well, it's something that they're certainly hoping for, Rosanna. It is something that they would need to do during that 90 minutes high-stakes debate. We know that Kamala Harris intends to try and act presidential, and her aides are saying that she intends to stay calm under pressure. But of course, as we've seen in past presidential debates where Donald Trump has been involved, and he's been involved in 6 in the past, that's sometimes difficult. He is someone who likes to try and get under the skin of the other person. But by all reports, Kamala Harris will also be trying that tactic as well, something that she's used in the past during her time as a prosecutor. She will want to try and push back against any attacks from Donald Trump, but also try and do all that she can to throw him, I guess, off his pace. He likes to switch up the subject, likes to talk about what he wants to talk about. Kamala Harris's aides are saying that they will try and take the fight to him during that debate on Tuesday night.
Nick, look, one of the criticisms that Harris has faced is that she's not really engaged enough with her electorate via interviews. She did one just in the last 24 hours or so. But in comparison to Trump, it's not really stacking up. So is there going to be an element of surprise in the debate in even sort of hearing her take Trump on?
Well, there could be. I mean, in one respect, you could look at this as the expectation, the bar being set quite low by the Harris campaign. There is that criticism, especially from the Trump campaign, that she hasn't had many media engagements, just that one high-profile interview that she did alongside her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz. There hasn't been opportunities for the press to be able to push her on issues of policy. She's done plenty of rallies and there's been plenty of enthusiasm within the Democratic Party. But this will be an opportunity for her to try and lay out her position in a much starker way. We heard from the Trump campaign in the course of the last few hours, one of the main cheerleaders for Donald Trump's, the Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who's helping him with his debate preparation, held a call with Trump supporters. And in it, he said that Kamala Harris had been wrapped in bubble wrap since her nomination, and she had a far higher bar to try and clear. because people haven't had a chance to put straightforward questions to her about her record. Matt Gaetz saying that Donald Trump will be the person to do that on Tuesday night, asking her straightforward questions, trying to push her on policy. But of course, it's 90 minutes of unscripted live television. Anything could happen, and we could see surprises. Of course, as you remember, Joe Biden's debate performance back in June was so disastrous, it ended up with him dropping out of the race just a few weeks later. So really expect anything on Tuesday night.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We come to this point because Biden didn't succeed in the last debate. Look, when it comes to Donald Trump, Nick, we know from people who've worked with him before on these debates that preparation isn't actually something he spends a lot of time doing. Do you think this is how he's going to approach this debate?
Well, it has been a huge contrast we're hearing from both camps in terms of how the candidates are preparing. Donald Trump's currently down in Mar-a-Lago, his estate in Florida. We're told that he's only held a few debate preparation sessions with a few aides. He hasn't had someone standing in the Kamala Harris position. That is something that normally candidates would do in order to prepare properly for a debate. It is something that Harris has been doing. She's been holed up in a hotel in Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania for nearly the last week, and she has even erected a stage. She's put up studio lights. She's had someone there playing the role of Donald Trump, and we're told from her aides that she's been working very much on policy positions, working on how to try and take those issues to the voters, but how to try and take the fight to Donald Trump. So certainly a difference in campaign style between the two of them on how they're trying to prepare for Tuesday night's event. Donald Trump, of course, is someone who likes to be off the cuff, who likes to be spontaneous, and perhaps that is part of his debate preparation, not being over-prepared, being prepared for anything, therefore.
Well, a good weekend for Trump, some would say, with some of the polls giving him a couple of points lead at last, because Harris has had a bit of a lead for a few weeks now, and some are saying the Harris honeymoon is over. It's still very tight, of course. We're looking at basically half and half. So how important will this debate be when it comes to swinging people's opinion?
I mean, it's going to be absolutely huge. There are not many big calendar events in this election cycle, and especially as we run up to the November 5th election, there aren't many opportunities to see the two candidates together. This may be the only debate. There is speculation that there could be a second debate around the beginning of October, but it hasn't been fixed by both campaigns. So this may be the only chance that voters get to see both candidates on the campaign stage together, facing off. That poll that you referenced, the New York Times Siena poll over the weekend, showed Donald Trump on 48% compared to Kamala Harris on 47%. When you break it down to the swing states, she was leading in 3 of them, Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin, and it was a dead heat in the other 4 big swing states. But that is good news for Donald Trump, because Kamala Harris in some polls has been leading by about 5 or 6% nationally. That certainly shows something of a switch, but it also shows how tight this race has now become. And because the race is so tight, it becomes very much a win or lose type situation for both of them during that 90-minute debate. Any slip up, any terrible viral moment could cause big problems for them. And remember, they're trying to convince those undecided voters out there, people who perhaps haven't been either that engaged in the election so far or simply haven't made up their mind. So as well as avoiding any missteps, they also need to do enough to be able to win over people who haven't yet decided who they're going to vote for in November.
Nick Harper, speaking to us from Washington, D.C., thank you. Well, Vice President Kamala Harris has enjoyed enormous enthusiasm since launching her bid for the White House, the so-called Harris honeymoon, spurred by a swell of support, especially amongst younger voters. She was buoyed further by last month's Democratic convention, in which she became the first woman of colour ever to top the ticket. But can the momentum last? Will America's youth take to the polls and help deliver her as president? Benji Hire finds out.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
Kamala Harris. She's been an online hit in viral videos which have taken social media by storm.
I'm just living that life.
Clips like this have been viewed by millions.
Coconut tree?
Her young fans remixing her quirks and references with famous pop songs. music megastars have got on board. Beyoncé's powerful track Freedom features in Kamala commercials. These adverts and content posted by her own team's TikTok account have helped create a hugely positive vibe shift from Joe Biden's campaign. Less forced, more fun. Now, though, the hard work begins, harnessing that energy and translating it into bodies at the ballot box.
I don't think the campaign used it in any way that, oh, we just need to keep going viral on TikTok. They're like, how can we use this to actually marshal people, to organize, to donate, and then ultimately to vote?
In the past 4 years, 16 million young people have become eligible to vote. In the days following Joe Biden's withdrawal from the contest, the non-partisan non-profit Vote.org saw its highest level of new registrations of the whole election cycle. And since the Vice President threw her hat in the ring, she's raised hundreds of millions of dollars, with a number of Gen Z donors rising by tenfold. Still, some young progressives groups remain sceptical.
Yes, there is a lot of momentum and public enthusiasm for Harris right now, but that is not going to last, and that is not a winning electoral strategy. Memes will not save us. Policy will save us. And I think in a lot of ways, the Democratic Party has been failing young people.
Kamala Harris will be pushed on many key policy positions: the economy, immigration, foreign affairs. So far, she's laid out her vision in broad strokes. Yet, as she faces off against Donald Trump, these issues will be brought to the fore. That energy, that buzz of which her campaign has fed, can only carry her so far. Benji Haya, Al Arabiya English, Washington.
Joining me now is my former colleague, the one and only broadcaster, Piers Morgan. Known, of course, for his fearless and uncensored approach to debate, Piers has become a household name throughout the world, really, for his high-profile interviews with some of those influential figures of our time. From sparring with Donald Trump to delving into the minds of the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo and Vladimir Zelensky, Piers has consistently pushed the boundaries of journalism and shaped discourse both on and offline. He is trailblazing a new frontier now in the digital zeitgeist, reshaping the very core of global discourse through his YouTube channel, Piers Morgan Uncensored, which has become the fastest growing news YouTube channel in the world. Piers, did you like that intro?
I couldn't have written it better myself, Rosanna. Thank you.
It was almost like you fed me the lines. It's really good to see you. How are you doing?
Well, congratulations on your new show, which I hear is doing great things over there. Some very exciting times for you. We miss you here, but the world, as you and I know, because of the digital space in particular, is a very small place these days.
It is indeed, and I want to come on to talk to you about that, because it was only this time last year exactly that you were congratulating me on launching a show in the UK, and now here we are doing something else, and both of us online. But I'll get to that, but of course, first, I want to start with the US, because I know you'll be following this debate that's going to happen between Harris and Trump tomorrow as closely as we are. And quite simply, Piers, who do you want to win?
Well, never mind who I want to win, because I'm not an American citizen, I'm not an American voter. I have a house in Los Angeles, so I've lived and worked out there for 20 years, but I never like to say who I personally want to win these things. What I would say is who I think will win. And I think that actually the momentum, which has been roaring away behind Kamala Harris since she replaced Joe Biden on the Democrat ticket, has now been moving inexorably back to Donald Trump. And the latest national poll in the New York Times says he's now 1% ahead of the national polling of likely voters. That's significant because Kamala Harris has had one hell of a honeymoon for the last few weeks, you know, doing hardly any interviews. I think one interview, hiding away, reading off teleprompters, having the coronation of the ticket presented to her on a plate, having the DNC convention, which was just a sealing of the coronation. But now things get real. And tomorrow night, she goes on stage for 90 minutes on live national American television in front of up to 100 million people. And there's no hiding place. And she's up against someone who I think, for all the good and bad you can say about Donald Trump, the one thing you can't deny is that he is one of the most effective and brutal debaters in world politics. So I fear that what's going to happen tomorrow is that Donald Trump is going to expose
Kamala Harris's weaknesses to the world in a way she's been desperate to protect herself from having exposed.
I hear your point completely about the rest of the world not wanting to hear two limeys talking about who they want to win the US election. You and me being Brits, of course, you do have a bit of presence in America, I'll give you that. But, I mean, it does sound like you're intensely sceptical of Harris. Do you think she's got any strength at all?
Well, look, the assets are she's 20 years younger than Joe Biden, who was basically a walking corpse by the time he quit the race or was driven out by Nancy Pelosi and others. So she has that going for her. She's certainly articulate. She's intelligent. There's no question of that. I wouldn't denigrate her record as a politician or as a lawyer. It's very impressive. However, there's a reason that she was very unpopular as Joe Biden's vice president. There's a reason when she's run for higher office in the Democratic Party to be the nominee before, it failed and crashed and burned, is that actually beneath all the often very word salady stuff that she comes out with, there's not much substance. And the substance that's there on her record is pretty left-wing progressive socialist. And she may be desperately trying now to pretend she didn't say defund the police or, didn't say that you shouldn't call illegal immigrants criminals and all these things. She's trying to reinvent the wheel about her own record and rhetoric. But unfortunately, the record is what it is. And I think that Trump will seize on that tomorrow. And he's already ahead in the latest national poll. And I think that will steam him forward, I suspect, to victory in November.
Look, I would love to talk to you more about the US election. There's too much ground to cover. I know we've only got you for a short amount of time. You're a busy man. But let's talk about that year that you've experienced as a broadcaster since you and I were I was launching the show last year in the UK in October. The events of October 7th happened. You and I saw each other every evening in the studio as you were doing this series of interviews with voices from Israel, voices from Palestine, voices from all over the world that were for or against either side. And it was a ride, I think, for you. I think it's fair to say. What was that year like? What did you learn?
Oh, it's been incredible. I mean, and what I learned is that there are very strong arguments on both sides of this whole Israel-Palestine debate going back to the 1940s. And to pretend otherwise is to dig your head in the sand and ignore history. And so I decided early on that I was going to try and be resolutely non-partisan. I wasn't going to take sides. I was going to platform everyone that had a big following in this space so they could either argue with me and I would hold them to account on their views, or they could argue with people who they were implacably opposed to. And I think that's what really resonated with people. People felt I was giving this enormous global news story a really fair shake when it came to how I reported it and presented it. And the debates we were holding really got huge numbers because people felt that they were not being told what to think on one side every day, as so many of the cable news networks around the world tend to do. They were getting both sides, and they were getting it in a passionate and very animated way, often very heated way. And, of course, it was always going to be like that. This is a very heated and passionate debate and has been for many decades. So I think the tipping point for me in terms of the show and why I wanted to take it fully digital was the interview with Bassem Youssef, which went viral around the world, not least in the Middle East, and was watched by 22 million people on our YouTube channel. That was the moment I realised that linear television is very restrictive and that YouTube is now really the platform that the whole world is tuning into.
Look, a lot of that heat that you're talking about obviously came from online, from users of X, users of other social media platforms around the world. You're no stranger to handling that kind of instant feedback on social media. You've advised me in the past, in fact, on how to stay resilient in the face of online abuse, trolls, the public debate. But in terms of this issue in particular, have you seen anything to that extent before?
No, I mean, the relentless trolling from both sides, I have to say, if you deviate one iota from their preferred line of argument, has been unlike anything I've ever experienced. It's been extremely unpleasant. Everyone who's involved in the news business on screen will tell you they've had the same. But you have to ignore that. You have to ignore the noise, ignore the trolls, ignore the abuse, ignore the threats. And you have to stick resolutely to what the job of a journalist is, which is not to take sides in an issue like this, but to allow people who have strong arguments to come together and debate. That is the bedrock of a democracy. That is the bedrock of what a proper society should be like. And that is what I think we've achieved with Piers Morgan Uncensored. People say to me, I don't really know what you think. That's good. I don't want people to really know what I think about a particular issue in terms of taking a side. I want to allow both sides to debate. I think it's far healthier for society if we do that more.
I'm interested to get your views on the state of kind of online public debate, especially given the way X has gone. I don't know if you've noticed, Piers, my every move is, I don't expect you to, but I haven't been using X much recently. Of course. It's so unpleasant. It is deeply unpleasant. And a lot of politicians, a lot of famous people, potentially even John Cleese last night, it seems, the British actor, have decided to leave X, along with Elton John, Stephen Fry, Whoopi Goldberg, to name a few. I mean, I think you'll be sticking around, but do you understand people wanting to leave?
Yeah, look, I do. As X has got bigger and bigger and bigger, I don't think it's just an Elon Musk issue. As it's got bigger and bigger as a platform, you're going to get more and more trolls, just law of averages. I have to say, I think the platform would be immeasurably improved if John Cleese did leave it. So that I will not be shedding any tears over, having had a few spats with him in the past. But no, look, I think it's not for the faint-hearted. And Elon Musk has done lots of good things in relation to free speech, I think. But he also has to do more, and I'm sure he would recognise this. He has to do more about the viciousness of some of these trolls. They shouldn't be allowed to make threats against people. They shouldn't be allowed to campaign and harass people in the way that so many of them do. And I hope Elon does do more to do that. I've talked to him about it. I'm sure he will. But look, I think the truth is it's an unfettered platform and you don't have to be on it. And I think that there are ways that you can mitigate the trolls. You don't have to allow people to follow you, for example. You can block them, you can mute them, you can do all that thing. It's a bit time-consuming, it's a bit laborious, and you'll still let the odd troll slip through the net. But I do think that fundamentally X is a platform for good. It remains my #1 news source, and it remains the place where I get the most ideas for arguments and debates. And I think for that reason, the good outweighs the bad.
Let me ask you, you said there that you've spoken to Musk. I know you have on several occasions, but in terms of landing that big sit-down interview, he's been a bit selective about who he speaks to and who he sits down. Will we ever get to see you do it?
He said he will, so let's see. I haven't got a date in the schedule yet, but I'm hopeful. I'd love to interview him. I think Elon Musk right now is an absolutely fascinating guy. I also think that despite his bad rep, which he gets from a section of people, that if you look at his record in totality, he's pretty much a force for good. You know, if you look at Tesla and what he's done for green cars, if you look at SpaceX and what that's been doing around the world, if you look at Neuralink and the extraordinary work that's doing in neuroscience. And if you look at his passionate support and defence of free speech, all these are good things. So he's not perfect, and he's a fascinatingly combative character, which I have no problem with. I'm like that myself. I would love to interview him at length and get inside that tremendous brain of his. But I met him down in Cannes at the Cannes Lions Advertising Festival, and he was incredibly fascinating. He talked about colonising Mars and how he would do it and why it's so important. I was mesmerised. So this is a guy who looks all the time way down to the future and wants to try and protect planet Earth from itself. And I think we should encourage people like him.
Just finally, Piers, I know you got a dash, but in terms of going online and then versus what's now called mainstream media or legacy media, is there still room for real journalism? Do you think it's being lost?
Oh, absolutely, there's room for real journalism. Yeah, I would say what we've done on Piers Morgan Uncensored in the last 2 years has been absolutely the epitome of real journalism, whether it's hosting fiery but revealing debates about world issues and big news stories, or whether it's me sitting down with Cristiano Ronaldo in the bombshell interview that led to him leaving Manchester United, going to Saudi Arabia, reinventing football in the Middle East. All these things are transformative. And, you know, I've done lots of big interviews, big debates and so on, which I would absolutely say are right up there with the very best ethos of good journalism. And I see lots of other people doing it in that space too. So it's, you know, it's a different kind of thing to conventional mainstream media. But mainstream media's had a few issues of its own in the last couple of decades. I think they've let themselves down many times by being too partisan without admitting it. I think by not doing their jobs properly as journalists. And I think what I like about the world of YouTube in particular, it is uncensored. You know, you can really say what you think. And I think that is good.
Look, Piers, I know it's not often you're on the receiving end of the questioning, so appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Well, best of luck with the show. I hear it's a big smash out there, so good luck.
Thanks, Piers. See you soon. Always good value there. Piers Morgan. Now, that is all we've got time for this edition of Global News Today. Be sure to join us again at the same time tomorrow for more interviews, more insights. Thanks for watching. Good night.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too